Good mythical afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Ayala live with a vlog for you. This is World War I Changes in Warfare. As always, please make sure that you are writing down these notes and you are listening as many times as you need to be successful in my class. As always, you can view this as many times and write your notes. Please make sure that you have your notes and everything ready by the due date. No question in the doobly-doo for you today. And as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the short little vlog. So our objectives or things we need to know is what was the war plan used by Germany and the Central Powers? What was the Western Front? What was the Eastern Front? How did warfare change from prior wars? And what major campaigns occurred during World War I? So first thing we gotta look up is battle plans. And the first thing we gotta look at is this idea of what happened at the home front. And the Entente and Central Powers both used this idea called total war, where it used all powers of the government, society, and its citizens to conduct the war. So that more or less means that they would even do things like rationing or limiting certain amounts of certain items that are in short supply. You can only get a set amount of gasoline, a set number of pounds of sugar, or whatnot, to make sure that those who are fighting have those equipment and the things that they need. The war plans for the Entente powers and allies, really all they wanted to do was to stop the war and stop France from being surrounded by its enemies. While the Central Powers had a different geopolitical position, since they are centered in Europe, and Central Europe to be exact, they came up with this idea of the Schlieffen Plan, which was made by a German general, which was to attack France first and knock them out of the war before Russia mobilizes, and then swing to the east and attack them. And, this was mostly because France had a standing army, and Russia actually had to conscript all of its people, get them trained, and then get them weapons, and then move them. France was all ready to go. So if you could knock out France, which is ready to go already, it'd be a little bit easier for you to get rid of Russia. Because if not, if Germany and Austria-Hungary fight on a two-front war, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to succeed. So what happens is we get to the Western Front, and stated in the Schlieffen Plan that Germany attacks France first. And since that is the western line of the war, we call that the Western Front. And Germany attacks at the Battle of the Marne on September 1914, and that becomes a major failure, and France wins that battle. And what this does, this leaves the Schlieffen Plan in tatters. Why? That's the big question. And it's because the Schlieffen Plan called for quick, fast warfare, not a stalemate that ended up in things like trench warfare. That is when soldiers fight from the trenches and go over the top to try to attack the other force's trenches. This ends up failing about 90% of the time, and no one really wins. And this is the biggest issue with the Western Front, is that there was huge loss of men for very little ground made. You may win 500 feet of ground by me lose 100,000 men, which is insane. And that space between the two trenches will end up becoming known as no man's land because no one really owned it. As soon as you win that land, you're probably going to die. And on the Western Front, the trenches ended up being about 500 miles in length each. So, not much movement. A lot of death, a lot of killing, but really not much movement going on in the Western Front. From there, we get the Eastern Front, which is the area that made up the German and Russian border, and though the stalemates did occur at this time, this was a much faster moving front than Western Front. Trench warfare itself was actually very localized in small geographic regions, and Russia actually did pretty well at first against the Austrians, but not so well against the Germans. Because you got to remember about the Germans. They're kind of like the Sparta of that time. If you remember the history from the Holy Roman Empire and Prussia and all that, even though they had a very small fighting force, it was highly trained and very well equipped. So we get some changes in alliances. First one, Russia drops out of the war because of war weariness and the onset of the Russian Revolution. The Tsarist regime in Russia can't really hold on. They don't have the political power or will or even the wealth to control their own people. Italy switches sides and goes to the Entente side because they didn't want to be a belligerent in this war. While the U.S. originally was neutral because the U.S. wants to actually profit off of both sides. But in the long term, they end up joining the Entente powers as an associated power, as we would call it. And it was mostly for two reasons. One was this idea of unrestricted submarine warfare, or the use of submarines by the Germans to attack any ships near its enemies. So you just be floating near any of Germany's enemies, and they would shoot you, even if you were a neutral power. And the Zimmer telegram, which was really a really bad call on the Germans. And this is when the Germans sent a telegram to Mexico stating that Germany would help Mexico gain its lands back that they lost during the Mexican-American War if they joined the Central Powers. That did not sit very well for the Americans, because they're like, no, you are not having Mexico join this war and try to take back its land that we've had for almost 60, 70 years. So the U.S. joins the Entente. From there, we're going to talk a little bit about battles on Europe. The Ottoman Empire was on the side of the Central Powers. And on this map, it is Turkey, but it's still the same thing. It's the Ottoman Empire. They also control this land down here and a little bit of land over here. And the major one was the Gallipoli campaign. And that's when the Allies wanted wanted to attack the Ottomans at the Dardanelles, I can never say that, control the sea lanes in the Mediterranean. This ended up failing because the Allies ended up losing about 250,000 people trying to attack these really high-end cliffs. Because when you looked at it, how this would kind of work is that the lane would be up here with their little fort and their weapons over here for the Ottoman Turks. Then you have a kind of a cliff and the beach down here. So the Allies would land on the beach, but they weren't prepared for the Ottoman Turks to actually fight back, even though they had the high ground, the defensive position, and more weaponry at that time. And also the imperial lands owned by all the warring parties all over Africa and Asia were at war. India was fighting against Germany, German possessions. And in Africa, Belgium was being attacked by, the Belgian Congo being attacked by their enemies, and so on and so forth. And then we go to new weapons of war. The first one we're going to talk about is poison gas, which was very deadly and very uncontrollable. And it kind of goes wherever the wind goes. So if you would lob a poison gas grenade at someone, you better hope that the wind does not shift direction to go back towards you. Because there were things like mustard gas, later sarin gas, that would just totally destroy someone's body and if you inhale it, it'd burn out your lungs. You also had the machine gun, which was because of industrialization, it would make a weapon that can shoot ammunition much more faster without having to reload or even, cock the pistol or the hammer. So this is right here, they're using a Browning. And they do have their gas mask on that is right outside of a trench, that little picture there. You have the tank, which was an armored vehicle that moved on chained tracks that could break through trenches, and was invented by the British. And if you look at this trapezoidal shape, the idea of the tank was literally to go up and down the trenches through no man's land and through the enemy's trenches to be able and protect the people inside and be able to kill those on the outside. So it was kind of like a moving fortress. And then you had the submarine, which was introduced and finally used properly by the Germans. And this underwater warship would use stealth tactics to attack larger vessels and trade ships. So this is what unrestricted submarine warfare comes from. The Germans were really adept at doing this, and they would and during World War II, they would also be good at that. Then they had the airplanes. They were first used as reconnaissance and scouts, and later have become bombers and fighter aircraft. And they become extremely important in World War II. They start being developed in World War I, but the battle tactics and the use of those airplanes don't really become very big and important until World War II. Anyway, that's the end of this slideshow. And as always, please make sure you go back and review to make sure you can get all the information you need. And as always, don't forget to be awesome.